शिरोदिनि वासिनि विष्णुविलासिनि जिष्णुनुते भगवति हेशिति कण्ठकुटुम्बिनि भूरि कुटुम्बिनि भूरि कृते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते सुरवरवर्षिणि दुर्धरदर्शिनि दुर्मुखमर्षिनि हर्षरते त्रिभुवनपोषिणि शङ्करतोषिणि किल्बिषमोषिनि घोषरते धनुजनिरोषिनि दिथिशुकरोषिनि दुर्मथतोषिनि सिन्धुसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते.
Hi guys, thank you for joining the live stream. I hope the audio is coming fine. Let us know if it is not. Let us know if my volume is fine and all. And today we have back with us Sreejit Datta, and today we are going to discuss the man who allegedly coined the term Hindutva. First and foremost, we will confirm if he did it or not, and how much he contributed to it, and overall his personality and the works he was involved with, and the things he had to counter as well, the controversies in his life. Thank you, Sreejit, for joining again.
It's a pleasure. Hi, and we are going to talk about Chandranath Basu, whom you have introduced as the man who had coined the term Hindutva. But here I would like to correct you. Actually, it was Bankim Chandra who had coined the term. But we can, of course, give credit to Chandranath for popularizing the term. Because he had written an entire treatise, an entire book called Hindutva, Hindu Prakrito Itihash. So the title of that book was Hindutva itself. The title had the word Hindutva, and it also had a sort of explanation given to that title, Hindu Prakrito Itihash, which can be translated into English as the true or real history of Hindus, or the Hindu nation. Yeah, and when we look into this book, we get to see that he has attempted to write the psychological makeup as well as the history of the Hindu nation, which cannot be found in archaeological and material. History can be understood from multiple aspects, and history can be written using multiple sources.
Yeah.
One of which is archaeology. The kind of archaeological findings that we have unearthed for various ancient civilizations, not least of which is the IVC, or the Indus Valley civilization, or what some people also call Saraswati Indus Valley civilization.
Yeah.
So, in the case of the Hindu nation, so far as Chandranath argues, the history of this nation should be most effectively found in its literature. And that includes not just the religious or scripture based literature, but also any kind of secular literature, even though there was no such clear distinction between secular and religious. But overall, if we can proceed with that sort of a broad division, so the scriptures, which includes not just description of the religion or the gods and goddesses, the various manifestations of divinity which the Hindus worship, still worship to this day, but also theological discussions, deep philosophical doctrines, which have been found mainly in the Upanishads, Brahma Sutra, and also in the Itihasa Purana literature, mainly in the Mahabharata, because in the Mahabharata you also find the Gita, which is not just scripturally the most important text for Hindus in today's time, but also a very deeply, profoundly philosophical text on which philosophers and various other scholars have written volumes. So Chandranath, first of all, included this sort of literature as one of the main sources for writing Hindu history or the history of the Hindu nation. The other source that he indicated for writing a history of the Hindu nation was, the kind of literature that great poets like Kalidasa, Bhavabhuti, Banabhatta, etc. have written. So he included, all these, roughly speaking, secular literature also as a great source of writing or constructing a history of the Hindu nation. So this was his main thesis or thought behind writing the book that we have just named, Hindutva, Hindu Prakriti Itihash. But when we look into the contents of this book, it's a very curiously constructed, designed book, because it goes on to give you a list of various features, observations, customs, practices of the Hindus, and using each of these observations, practices, customs, rituals, etc., even social mores, as seen in the Hindu society, he tries to give up. He tries to give us a clear picture, as clear a picture as was possible for him to present before his audience, of the psychological makeup of the Hindus. And I would add, even though he does not mention it, even though he does not claim as much, I get to identify a sort of anthropological approach.
Right.
So you get a bit of sociology in it also, because he is talking about the social customs of the Hindus from both a historical perspective. He's talking about how it was back in the day and how it has become now, that is in his time. Let me also clarify, for the sake of better understanding, the time in which Chandranath lived. He was born in 1844 and he lived until 1910. So middle of the 19th century to the very beginning of the 20th. That was his lifetime. And so when he is talking about the social customs of the Hindu nation or the Hindu society, he is talking both comparing the society of an ancient Hindu nation and the present Hindu nation, or what the Hindus have now become in his lifetime, his contemporary Hindu society. So there is a there is a comparison between the past and the present of the Hindu society. The second basis of comparison that Chandranath takes and presents also in his book is between the Europeans and the Hindus. So, and not just Europeans, he also brings into the picture people from other parts of Asia, mainly the Muslims, people from places like Turkey and Afghanistan and such places. So he basically gives us both a chronological comparison within the Hindu society, how it was and what it has become. In Bonkim's language, we can call it Maja Chilen, Maja Hoyachen. That's sort of an approach, what the mother was and what the mother has become. If we, substitute the Hindu society as the idea of mother, even though Bonkim originally talked about the country as a whole, Bharatavarsha, or more specifically Bengal. So that chronological comparison is very much present in Chandranath's Hindutva. And then there is this spatial or racial comparison. So comparing different races, different nations, different countries, and continents even. So he begins his comparison between the Asiatic people and the Europeans. Sometimes he also uses the term Orientals, but this term is not used in a very organic sense. He is often using it in order to show what sort of point of view the Europeans have presented of the Asian people and especially of the Indian people, of the Hindus. So he's sometimes taking an ironical tone when he is using that term Oriental. Okay,
I see.
so you get to see that there is a clear idea that Chandranath has in his mind while writing this book called Hindutva Hindu Prakrito Itihash, that Orientalism is a thing among the Europeans or the European scholars and writers who are writing about Indians, Asiatics, and specifically about the Hindus. One example that I would like to give to make this point even more clearer, that Chandranath was, quite clear about what Orientalism is, even though Orientalism as a terminology has appeared much after Chandranath's time with Edward Said.
Oh, I thought it was always common. Okay, my mistake.
No, Orientalism, okay, so let me clarify this. Orientalism as the practice of cultivating the knowledge of the Orient, that was there at the time of Chandranath. That would be 19th century. So this is like saying Orientology, okay, or the branch of knowledge which gives us historical, anthropological, sociological, and even economic, political idea of the people who are called Orientals. Okay, so that is as a name of a particular branch of knowledge, largely within anthropology. Okay, but by the time Said, that is Edward Said, started talking about Orientalism, that would be in the 1980s and 1990s, there was a clear distinction from this previous use of the term Orientalism. So from merely being a branch of knowledge about the Oriental people or the Asians, and particularly the Chinese, the Indians, Hindus, and other Asiatic people, it became a particular approach, a particular paradigm of looking at these people. So that would be reflective of the prejudices, the kind of glasses that a European or outsider observer would be wearing in order to look at, analyze, and then describe, these people called the Orientals. I hope I'm able to clarify this distinction. So the term Orientalism as a perspective which is prejudicial, which is even pejorative, you can call it a pejorative term, that is a new invention, a comparatively new invention of mainly credited to Edward Said. But the Orientalism that was in vogue as a terminology during Chandranath's time in the 19th century, that was more about the knowledge of the Orientals, knowledge of Asiatic people and Indians, Hindus, Chinese, Japanese, etc. But it is important for us to see that in Chandranath's book Hindutva Hindu Prakrito Itihash, he talks about the Oriental people as seen by the Europeans. That understanding or that knowledge that Chandranath applies in order to talk about how the Europeans have discussed, the Orientals and specifically the Hindus, let's say about a weak people who are not prone to suffer, great hardship in order to achieve something great, in order to achieve something bigger. These kind of psychological descriptions, these sort of descriptions that went on to cover the characteristics of a particular nation called the Hindus and the Orientals in general. This is something that this is something that Chandranath draws our attention to. Okay, so he can be described as one of the first people who are talking about this colonial idea, this colonial perspective, rather, not just an idea, but a perspective which demeans the people of Asia and specifically the Hindus. Now, this is something that his contemporaries, such as Bankim Chandra Chatterjee and Bhudev Mukhopadhyay, are also aware of, and there is a reflection in their own works, in Bankim's works, and also in Bhudev's essays. You know, these are also authors that very interestingly Chandranath mentions in his book
Yeah.
Hindutva.
Yeah.
Okay, so he clearly mentions Bankim's Dharma Tattva, something which we have discussed earlier in this series, and he also mentions the book called Samajik Prabandha, or it can be translated as Essays on Society, which is written by Bhudev Mukhopadhyay. And I should also perhaps mention here that both Bhudev and Bankim were a kind of mentors to Chandranath. So Chandranath used to very closely deliberate with them on issues related to religion, society, politics, and history, of course, with both these authors, great authors of his time. And to a great extent, we get to see an acknowledgement in Chandranath's writings of the indebtedness that he feels towards both of them, both Bankim as well as Bhudev. So we can understand that there is this mentorship sort of thing that is going on between these two elderly authors, these two senior authors, and Chandranath. Now, coming back to Chandranath's Hindutva, the contents of his book, as I was talking about, the awareness that Chandranath has about how the Europeans are pejoratively or negatively talking about Hindus and the Oriental people in general. If we look at the subjects or chapter division that Chandranath has created for his book, then we get a fair idea of how he has designed, the historical narrative about the Hindu nation. So I'm just going to read out the content page. So he begins with Soaham. Okay, so this is one of the Mahavakyas that we find in the Upanishads, right? One of the great sentences uttered by the Vedantins, Soaham, which means I am that, right? Where the idea of Advaita Vedanta, the non-dualist idea, is given in a pithy expression. So that is, the first chapter in Chandranath's book, Hindutva, Hindur Prakrito Itihash. The next chapter is titled Laya. Okay. What it is, we can discuss maybe later on. Let me just give you the list first of the contents. Then he talks about Nishkama Dharma or Nishkama Karma. Goes on to talk about Dhruva, who was a sort of legendary figure, who is a legendary figure from the Puranas, the Vishnu Purana being one of the main Puranas in which we find a mention of Dhruva, the character of Dhruva. Then he also talks about something called Tushanala. Okay, Tushanala, in Bengali we call it Tushanal. Kodak Kranti, then Putra, then Ahara, Brahmacharya, Vivaha, Tetrish Koti Devata, or the 33 types of Devatas, then Pratima or Murti Puja, image worshipping, Maitri, and so on and so forth. Okay, so in a sense, this gives us the kind of schema which Chandranath had used in order to write the history of the Hindu nation. So what he was basically doing was to take up certain main tenets and practices of the Hindus, and then while explaining them, while expanding on those ideas and ideals, those practices, customs, and characteristics of the Hindu society or the Hindu nation, he was giving a picture of the social and cultural history of the Hindus. So, in this way, he basically created a historical, sociological, and what I would like to highlight, an emic anthropological account of the Hindus. Emic
Right.
means from an insider's point of view. Now, this is very unique because I don't think, apart from a few smaller length essays by both Bhudev and Bankim, there was such an attempt as done by Chandranath, to anthropologically talk about the Hindu nation, right from the perspective of being a Hindu, being a practicing, Hindu. Okay, so this is quite unique about Chandranath's attempt, that he wrote this book called Hindutva, Hindu Prakrito Itihash, where he is describing the social, cultural history of the Hindu nation and also giving an anthropological account from the insider perspective as
Yeah.
a Hindu.
Yeah.
So this is in a
Sir,
nutshell what
what was the meaning of Laya and Maitri in this context? Laya,
right.
I mean tempo in music, and Maitri is just friendship. What are they in this context?
Yeah. So Laya is what can be understood as dissolution. Now, let us try and understand what dissolution means in this context. Once again, the first 3 or 4 chapters in this book by Chandranath in Hindutva, Hindu Prakrito Itihash, namely Soaham, Laya, Nishkama Dharma, and Dhruva. These 4 chapters are mainly related to the Hindu religion. So it is about the theology of Hindu religion. He starts with Soaham, which is one of the great Mahavakyas or great utterances of the Vedanta, giving us in a nutshell what the Advaita Vedanta or non-dualism is all about. That the Jiva or the individual soul is essentially Brahman or the absolute. Okay, that there is no essential difference, there is no qualitative difference between the Jiva and the Brahman, the individual and the absolute or God. Next, he talks about Laya. Laya is nothing but the process of dissolving this sense of the individual self into the absolute. So, what he has described in the first chapter under the title Soaham, the principle of non-dualism or Advaita Vedanta. In the next chapter called Laya, he basically describes how that state, that absolute state can be attained. So this is something that can be described also by the term Brahmalina status. Okay, that is somebody who has become Lina or dissolved into the absolute or Brahman. So somebody who has lost one's sense of individual self into this great or absolute self, self with a capital S, maybe one can describe it as that, into Brahman. So Laya is in that sense. Okay, so you can understand it as a dissolution of the individual self.
Okay. And Maitri?
Maitri is something that comes towards the very end of this book, and this he understands as universal love. Now, this is something in common between what he talks about in this book in Hindutva, Hindu Prakrito Itihash, under the title or under the name of Maitri, and what Bankim Chandra Chatterjee has talked about in Dharma Tattva as Vishwa Prem or universal love, of which one specific part is Swadesh Prem or love of one's own country or nation, which according to Bankim Chandra was the greatest arena of practicing universal love. So according to Bankim Chandra, one can reach a state of universal love if they start with love for one's own nation. And this love for one's own nation will slowly, expand into universal love, where one can love anyone and everyone in this universe and in the world, uh, irrespective of their caste, creed, nation, ethnicity, etc., even religion.
I see.
So that is something that Chandranath has described, but his intention of describing it is slightly different from Bankim Chandra. What Bankim Chandra is talking about is how to attain a state of universal love, starting albeit with Swadesh Prem, or love of one's nation, patriotism or nationalism. So there, in Bonkim's exercise, it is about the expansion of the self, and therefore attaining the state of universal love is part of one's religious practice, one part of one's sadhana or spiritual pursuit. Okay, but in the case of Hindutva of Chandranath Bose, this idea of universal love, or Maitri as he calls it, is to show how the Hindu nation is special and how it is distinct from other nations of the world, because Maitri is such an important concept for the Hindu. Okay,
Right.
so basically the point that he's trying to make is that the Hindus are a special kind of people, and they are even can be considered, they can even be considered as a better or superior race, because they give so much of importance and emphasis on the concept of Maitri or universal love. So that is what Chandranath understands and explains what he calls Maitri.
I see. Okay, we have a question already, many questions, but I have also noted down many questions. Okay, first question is that what were his views on Islam? Because some historian has accused him of being anti-Islam or anti-Muslim.
Uh, I don't think that that is a very correct understanding of Chandranath, because in Hindutva, Hindu Prakrito Itihash, if we go by that particular book, which is his magnum opus, he often praises Muslims, of course, in a comparative sense. So, in a section of this book, he goes on to compare the three nations or the three peoples called the Europeans, the Muslims, and the Hindus. Now, he's quite clear that Muslims and Hindus are similar in one way, and that is they are both Asiatic people. Okay, that they both belong to the continent of Asia, and therefore there are certain similarities in terms of broader culture, broader Asiatic culture, or what can also be described by the term the Oriental culture. Now, that is a term that the outsider, that is the Occidental or the European, has given. So he
Yeah.
takes, he uses that term, but like I have already pointed out, often in an ironical sense, in order to show how the Oriental is actually superior to the Occidental or the Westerner or the European. Specifically about Muslims, he talks about how they are very particular about observing their religious practices and how they take their religious customs, their religious tenets, the tenets of Islam, very seriously. And in this comparison, he basically evaluates the Europeans and specifically the English people as the people who are not so serious about religiosity, about spirituality, and therefore they are not so strongly observant of their own religious customs, tenets of their Christian religion. So in that regard, he places Muslims as a superior people. He positions them as a people, as a nation superior to the Europeans. Now, in comparison to the Muslims, when he talks about the Hindus, he talks about them as an even more, strongly, stringently religious people, because specific examples that he gives of the customs related to food practices, about culinary practices, about cooking, and all these things, which are very particularly mentioned in the scriptures called Dharma Shastras. And there he compares the Hindus and the Muslims according to how strongly these two people observe the customs related to food practices and culinary practices.
I
So
see.
in this comparison, his evaluation is that the Hindus are even more serious than the Muslims. Whereas the Muslims themselves are more serious than the Christians or the Europeans in general, and therefore he creates a sort of hierarchy where the Hindus would be the most superior in this case. Um, a rung below them would be the Muslims, and a rung even below them would be the Christians and the Europeans, and specifically the English people. He seems to have a beef, particularly against the English people, and that is quite understandable because one of the main planks from which he's talking about these issues, based on which he's making these comparisons between Hindus, Muslims, and Christians, or Europeans and the British people in particular, is of course patriotism and nationalism. And he's talking, speaking, writing about a time where the main influences were the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj, not even the Adi Brahmo Samaj as led by Maharishi Devendranath, and of which Rabindranath Tagore himself was, a secretary. Not that, the more rational, the more radically rational, I should say, and very Europhile sort of people, or the sect of the Brahmos was this.
Had the Brahmo Samaj bifurcated by now?
Yes, it had
So this is the
bifurcated
Keshav Chandra
because
faction.
no, the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj is
Oh.
something that is led by people like Shivnath Shastri, and then Vijay Krishna Goswami,
I see.
the faction that was led by Keshav Chandra Sen was firstly called Bharatborshiya Brahmo Samaj, the
Oh.
Indian Brahmo Samaj, and later on, when he became more Hinduized under the influence of Sri Ramakrishna, he started the Nava Vidhan, or the new dispensation of Brahmo Samaj. So the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj is something which was very vocally against both Adi Brahmo Samaj led by Maharishi Devendranath, as well as the Bharataborshiya Brahmo Samaj of Keshav Chandra Sen, and of course quite opposed to the Nava Vidhan. The main thing about the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj, I'm talking about the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj because it will help us understand Chandranath's stance. The main thing about this sect of the Brahmos, the Sadharan Brahmo Samajis, was that they were radically rational. They were so radical that they were ready to give up any and every scriptures that the Hindus had, and they were also characterized by their tendency to imitate the Western civilization. That they were Europhiles. One can even describe them as that. They always wanted to compare their own people with the Europeans, and they were of the opinion that the Europeans were superior in terms of their society, their sciences, their knowledge, their customs, etc., etc. So among the Hindus, there was a kind of dissatisfaction about this particular sect of the Brahmos, the Southern Brahmo Samajis, and it is this sort of dissatisfaction was visible even among the scientifically minded Hindus. So now we are talking about Chandranath and his mentors like Bankim and Bhudev, all of whom were pretty scientifically minded. So they were very much in favor of English education. They were very much in favor of taking up what best aspects that the European civilization could offer Hindus or Indians in general. And therefore, these people were not at all orthodox in that sense. Okay?
Yeah.
So, this progressive-minded Hindus who are not so fond of or not so much in favor of imitating Europeans and the British in particular blindly, they became vocal like Chandranath. So they were basically the people whom Chandranath was representing. So we have to understand this division within the Hindu society, within Hindu intellectuals specifically, in order to understand what was going on, and who are the kind of people and what set of ideas and ideals Chandranath, Bhudev, Bankim were representing. But I would also like to make a distinction here between people like Bankim and people like Chandranath, because we get to see that Chandranath sometimes becomes way too defensive and sometimes even reactionary in describing why the Hindu people or the Hindu nation would be superior. He has this tendency throughout this book called Hindutva, Hindu Prakrito Itihash, to sort of prove that the Hindus are, superior in terms of their racial, social, and religious practices and customs. And in many cases, he tries to defend, some of the practices for which we got to see a kind of social resistance right from the time of 1820s or 1830s. This book that we are talking about, Hindutva Hindu Prakrito Itihash by Chandranath Basu, was published in 1892. So you can understand that it is quite closer to the end of the 19th century, right? But we have to also keep in mind that this is a time when Vivekananda has not come into the picture. Okay, why this is important to be kept in mind? Because with Vivekananda coming into the picture, we get to see a new kind of rejuvenation among the Hindus. That Hindus get to understand that simply on the basis of the knowledge and the kind of culture that they have right from the ancient times to the present time, they can actually prove that they have something to offer to the West. So far, the Hindus were seen as a kind of people who can only be taking things, knowledge, in terms of technology, in terms of social customs, all these things which will make them a civilized people. Hindus were simply on the receiving end, okay, that they were borrowing things from the West, and it is the West which has the best things to offer. But with Vivekananda coming into the picture, with him talking about the Hindu religion in front of a Western audience, in front of the Americans, and then later in the British Isles, the Hindus started to take legitimate and a real sense of pride in their own culture, in their own religion, in their own philosophies. So, before Vivekananda, this sort of inferiority complex, if it is a complex at all, was very much there among the Hindus, and it is to address that complex, address that sense of inferiority that Chandranath was writing.
Okay. And did he support things like Sati Pratha and child marriage?
Sati Pratha is something that he has hardly talked about, but he talks about child marriage, at length. And this is something on which...
only?
In the book Hindutva, Hindu Prakriti Itihash.
Okay.
He also talks about it in other occasions, in other tracts and essays that he has written. But in the book Hindutva itself, we get to see at least 2 chapters. I will tell you the names of these chapters. Koda Kranti. Okay. This is a very interesting title that he has given. Koda Kranti basically is a combination of 2 words, 2 Bengali words, Koda and Kranti, which are nothing but monetary units. Okay, just like Taka, Paisa, Ana, Adhuli, these we have in Bengali. Ana is also something that is quite pan-Indian, right? Ek Ana, Char Ana.
Yeah, Anna.
So, yes. So, similarly, we had even smaller units of money, and Koda, Kranti, Donti, Kak, all these would be, these different names of the monetary units. Now, Koda and Kranti, these 2 monetary units he has specifically chosen because they are quite idiomatic in the Bengali language. Okay, so when we talk about minutest segments, when we look at the details of objects and things, then we say that korai gondai ushul kore newa, that he will take every cent of it. This is the kind of sense that that you get from Kodai Gondai or Koda Kranti. Now, why Chandranath takes that unique combination of words, borrowing from monetary units or names of monetary units, because he is talking about how minute observation that the Hindu lawgivers have taken or adopted in trying to understand, analyze, and then create laws for the Hindu society. And there he talks about the practice of child marriage. He talks about what would be the reasons why, not just talks about, he basically describes, he basically translates certain sections from, texts like the Manu Samhita, and talks about why Manu has given a particular kind of law about child marriage, why Manu thinks that a child, a female child, should be given away in marriage before attaining a certain age. Okay, so all these are quite clear that Chandranath is talking about child marriage very strongly. He defends that practice, and this very interestingly brings him to a point of clash with Rabindranath Tagore. Now, we have to understand that Rabindranath is somebody who is opposed to the kind of Europhile Sadharan Brahmo Samajis. He is also opposed to the kind of tendency that Keshav Chandra was showing, at least early in his career, towards Christianity, that he was quite fond of Christian ideas. So, Rabindranath, being the secretary, he was an office bearer of the Adi Brahmo Samaj, and this is also at a time when his father was quite a prominent leader of the Brahmos. So he was quite opposed to all these radical rationalists and those who are in favor of getting rid of the scriptures, okay, and making themselves quite westernized, so to speak. But even then, Rabindranath became quite unhappy when he saw that Chandranath was writing things like, Koda Kranti in support of child marriage. He also talks about, this particular subject of child marriage in another chapter of this book called Hindutva, which is titled Vivaha, as simple as that. Okay. So in these two chapters mainly, Vivaha and Koda Kranti, Chandranath defends child marriage, and this is something that Rabindranath opposes, and as a result of that, we get to see this beautiful essay that Rabindranath had written called Hindu Vivaha or Hindu Vivaho in Bangla. Okay. Where I think I have mentioned it in one of my exchanges with you on social media, that he was very much opposed to child marriage, but at the same time he was opposed to creating laws by or with the support of the British in order to abolish something like child marriage or any practice that is intrinsic to the Hindu society that has been coming from traditional scriptures or texts or law texts, law books from the lawgivers of the Hindu tradition. So this became a point of contention, and if we look at the kind of social tendency during the time of this controversy between Chandranath Basu and Rabindranath, by the way, they were quite good friends. They were very good friends, and they often used to meet, exchange ideas, and Chandranath used to praise many of Rabindranath's works, not just literary works, but also his social essays, his social commentary, and vice versa. Rabindranath was also quite a follower of all these people, Chandranath, Bankim, Bhudev Mukhopadhyay. So when this controversy broke out, Rabindranath had written a poem in which he basically laments that he has to now oppose these people and their ideas, and specifically Chandranath. Okay, around this time, 1888 to 1892. When these essays were being written, and later on it came out in the form of this book called Hindutva, Hindu Prakriti Itihash. But after this controversy, we get to see that at least in the Bengali society, among the Hindus of Bengal and the intellectuals of the Hindu intellectuals of Bengal, the verdict was favoring more of Rabindranath's position rather than Chandranath's.
Yeah. What were his justifications? Why was he propagating child marriage? Why did he think it was important?
Right. So he mentions this particular segment from the Hindu lawgivers' works, that as soon as, and it sounds quite even outrageous from today's perspective, many people might feel that this is a very discriminatory approach. He talks about how, upon attaining the age of experiencing menstruation, the girl child starts to have sexual feelings, and with the rise of the sexual feeling at upon attaining that particular age of menstruation, they would be thinking about multiple men, and that would basically make them impure, or they take away the concept of satitva, or being a
Okay.
sati, being a pure woman who is one pointedly dedicated to her husband or her future husband, and therefore even before attaining the age of menstruation, they should be given away in marriage. This is the kind
Okay.
of justification that Chandranath gives, but this is not Chandranath's own justification. He has, of course, borrowed it from the Hindu lawgivers, from traditional scriptures.
Okay. What was Rabindranath's counter to this argument? Did he
Well,
say that no,
Rabindranath,
this does not happen in young girls, or did he say that no, even then let's not do this?
no, Rabindranath, of course, acknowledges that sexual feelings is a natural, sort of result of
Right.
or upon attaining the age of menstruation. But Rabindranath is more about taking an approach where organically and by education or by cultivation or culture, the Hindu woman or the girl child can be taught about the concept of good, how to be a good woman. Okay, so
I
the
see.
concept of satitva is something that Rabindranath accepts. That is a premise that Rabindranath starts from, but his approach to cultivating that satitva is quite radically different from Chandranath. For Chandranath,
Right.
this is a wholly biological thing, and culture or cultivation has no contribution to it, no power actually over
Right.
the
Right.
psychological and biological, physiological changes that are taking place at the girl child's mind and body at the time of menstruation. But Rabindranath is of the point of view that this can be managed in a, or rather through education and culture.
Right. And coming back to Muslims and Islam a little, he was looking at only the Europeans or the British as an enemy. He didn't have any criticism of Muslims at that moment.
Yes, that would be more or less correct. But like
I
I have
see.
told you, his comparison was between the Muslims, the Christians or Europeans in general, and the Hindus. So therefore, he is creating a very clear hierarchy of who would be considered, a superior ethnicity or a superior society, if I may call it that,
Right.
because he's taking that sociological and anthropological approach, and he's saying that in terms of morality, in terms of how sincerely or strongly one abides by their cultural mores, how
Right.
one is quite self-confident. So he has this chapter called Dhruva, okay, in the book Hindutva. He has borrowed this title from the name of the character Dhruva, who's a very prominent Vishnu Bhakta who
Okay.
appears in the Hindu Puranas, mainly in the Vishnu Purana. And he's quite famous for asserting his willpower. So basically, in this chapter that Chandranath has termed Dhruva, he's talking about the willpower of Hindus. He is of the opinion that Hindus have great willpower, based on which they can undertake high penances and vratas. And especially he talks about the kind of penances that brahmacharinis, the widows, the women, irrespective of whether they are widowed or not, they undertake. The kind of vratas and the penances that they undertake is emblematic of the willpower of the Hindu race. So therefore, according to Chandranath, the Hindus are, a special race or nation because they are characterized by the greatest force of will, or their confidence or self-confidence.
Okay. Now,
And,
how?
and
Okay,
sorry,
go
just
ahead.
to
Go
finish
ahead.
it, and in that regard, they are superior to both the Muslims as well as the Europeans or Christians,
I
according
see.
to Chandranath.
Okay. So, what was his main motivation of writing this book? I mean, as in, how different was his idea of Hindutva, or his making a point about Hindutva different from Savarkar's Hindutva? Because Savarkar was writing so that he could prove that, see, this is why we need a country of our own, and this is why the British need to be kicked out. And this is who we are Hindus. That was his.
Right. So Chandranath's main motivation, like I've already indicated, was to create a sense of confidence and decrease this sense of inferiority that Hindus of his contemporary society and his milieu had, mainly because of the influence of the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj as well as the Christian missionaries.
Hmm.
Okay, and this is also a time, 1892, before Swami Vivekananda has entered the picture. Swami
Yeah.
Vivekananda would become famous from 1893 onwards, and he would return to India in 1897 this movement towards regaining the self confidence of Hindus, this sense of being complete in oneself as a nation and as an ethnicity, as a religion. This would
Hmm.
come quite a few years after Chandragupta. Sorry, again I'm using this name Chandragupta again and again, but Chandranath was writing or talking about between 1880s and early 1890s. So
Okay.
this is a time when you can think of um, uh, the Bengali youth who are being led away by two forces. One, the Sadharan Brahmo Samajis, who are
Hmm.
ultra radicals in terms of their rationalist movement, and the Christian missionaries. Because
Hmm.
in the previous podcast, we have talked about Brahmabandhu Upadhyay. Okay, and Brahmabandhu was not, an exception. There were many
Right.
people who are highly educated and they were English educated. And
Hmm.
in fact, Chandranath repeatedly attacks the English educated Hindu who are,
Hmm.
sort of leaving the Hindu fold, and
I see.
they are condescending upon Hindu practices,
Hmm.
the practices of their forefathers, their ancestors, and therefore the main audience that Chandranath was addressing were these Hindu youth
Okay.
who are being led astray by the two forces of the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj and the
Hmm.
Christian missionaries.
Right. How popular was his work? Like today, we don't even know of him. I first heard of him from Jesai Deepak 2 years back. Was he as unsuccessful back then as well?
Yes, yes, he was quite popular, and
Okay.
we can sort of have a measure of his popularity from the kind of reaction that his writings were generating. So Tattva Bodhini Patrika, which was the mouthpiece of the Adi Brahmo Samaj, was basically critiquing his work, sometimes praising, sometimes criticizing. So Rabindranath was the main author who was leading this sort of engagement with
Hmm.
this particular segment of the Hindu intellectuals, mainly represented by Bankim Bhudev and Chandranath. So
Hmm.
Rabindranath was both praising some of the works of Chandranath and vehemently criticizes some other works, mainly in terms of Hindu marriage and child marriage, especially. So, if we look at the kind of reactions that Chandranath's works were generating, and evoking response from prominent intellectuals like Rabindranath, and Rabindranath was already a young and well-known intellectual and poet at that time when this sort of exchange is happening. He was 31 years of age, when
Okay.
Hindutva Hindu Prakriti Itihas had come out, okay, in
I see.
1892. So you can understand from this sort of reactions, criticisms that Chandranath's works were generating, that he was quite, he had created quite a stir among at least the educated section of Hindus of Bengal.
Right. And Chandranath Basu himself was highly educated, right? So he was part of the colonial education system anyway.
Yes, very much. And, following the example of his mentors, and specifically the example of Bonkim, he was also, a highly English educated person, and who had been working with the British, under the British, for a considerable length of his career. So, despite all that, he had been able to sort of keep himself aloof from this mainstream of being led towards radical rationalism and a blind imitation of European civilization or Western civilization, and of course also to Christianity. So one can think of him as one of those rare individuals like Bonkim, like Bhudev, and also Rabindranath to a great extent, who were keeping the fire and the flag of Hindutva burning and flying in the dark years of 1880s and 1890s. Before Vivekananda, Swami Vivekananda would burst forth into the scene. And from then onwards, it would be an upward swing for Hindutva.
Right. So he did not have any specific, opposition to getting educated in the colonial English medium education, right? In the
No, not at all. In fact, I have already mentioned that, like his mentors Bonkim and Bhudev, he was quite clearly mentioning, he was emphasizing even that the Hindu youth should undertake English education and take in, absorb, and assimilate as much of the best of the European civilization that Europe has to offer. So he was quite clear on that regard, that science and technology, as the Europeans were doing it at his time, should be learned by Hindus, but the Hindus can become teachers of Europeans when it comes to theology, when it comes to morality, when it comes to social practice and social laws, social customs. And in those regards, he thought that the Hindus had no reason to follow or imitate or feel inferior to the Europeans, and that they had in fact a lot in fact to teach the Europeans or the other nations of the world.
Right.
So this was his stance.
Right. What do you personally think of his view on child marriage? Because do you remember some days back someone tagged us on Twitter because some guy had called him a pedophile. I guess he got married at the age of 60 or something. Would you agree with that view?
No, because if we have to go by that criterion, then we are again making the mistake of retrojecting our current values. So because child marriage was quite a common practice among Hindus and even other nations, among Muslims, for example, at that time it was quite common for even progressive intellectuals like Bankim Chandra or Chandranath himself and Rabindranath also, right? So it would be a very simplified and simplistic even kind of approach to look at the society that Chandranath was talking about, or Rabindranath was talking about even, from the point of view, from the social and moral point of view of today's time. We should not make that mistake. We should understand their times as a special historical period, and we should try and understand what sort of motives were active among the intellectuals of that time who were trying to reform, who were talking about what sort of pros and cons are inherent in social customs like child marriage. So, for example, Rabindranath, when he is criticizing Chandranath's works, he gives the pros and cons of both pros and cons of child marriage. But even after presenting all those, he gives the verdict in favor of abolishing child marriage from a very social, organic movement within the Hindu society, and not by force of law, and that to the law of the foreign administrator or the British ruler of the Hindus at that time.
Right. Is this comment correct?
What is the comment?
Oh, you can't see it. Okay, okay. The comment is Rishi
No, I
Bankim
can see it
Chandra.
now. Rishi Bankim Chandra opposes Vidyasagar on the point of Vidhova Vibah. Yes, yes. So he is of the opinion that Vidyasagar was basically trying to make a point, by normalizing Vidhava Vivaha, etc., etc. But I think this again becomes a point of how orthodox or how progressive these individuals were.
Right.
Bankim and Vidyasagar were contemporaries, and they had exchanged ideas, and they had their own opinions. They differed on certain issues like Vidha Vivaha. But it is not to mention, by mentioning this particular point, one cannot or one should not understand that Bankim Chandra was opposing Vidha Vivaha. So he was basically showing,
Okay.
by making this sort of a stance, that how far one can go in the name of social reform or religious reform. Okay,
Okay.
this is to show the extent of social or religious reform. And Bankim Chandra was of the opinion that least intervention should be done in terms of the laws that have to be brought about, that too with the help of the British, and
Yeah.
not from an organic movement arising from within the social milieu of the Hindus, on which he would be agreeing with Rabindranath, I suppose, right?
I see.
And which is why Rabindranath also was quite a follower in these regards, because Bankim's views initially and to a large extent uh, were in unison with his father's views, that is Maharishi Devendranath's views. Maharishi Devendranath, if you compare his stance with some of the stances taken by even Ram Mohan Roy, not even Vidyasagar. Vidyasagar is a contemporary of people like Bankim and Devendranath and Rabindranath. But Raja Ram Mohan Roy should be considered a generation earlier than all these people, right?
Right.
And especially a generation earlier than Devendranath as well as Bankim. So when we compare Raja Ram Mohan Roy's stance in terms of social and religious reform and the stance that Devendranath took in the case of social reform specifically, Devendranath would come across as a more orthodox person. Okay,
Right.
so now from that comparison, you can understand how we should look upon Vidyasagar, Devendranath, and Bankim based on their individual stances on the questions of social reform.
Right. Did Chandranath Basu have any views on Varnashram Dharma?
Yes, yes. So, in fact, one of the chapters in his book Hindutva Hindu Prakrito Itihash is Brahmacharya, and he's quite serious about following this particular stage of a Hindu's life, because he's of the opinion that on this stage depends the moral and even social upbringing of a Hindu individual, man or a woman, right from the very beginning of their life. So if one fails to observe brahmacharya, which not only means which does not only mean celibacy, okay, it includes a particular kind of discipline that the Hindu child has to follow towards their elders, towards their teachers, and towards everything that they do. So, a rigorous physical training would be part of brahmacharya, okay, so that their health is kept intact. A kind of a special kind of food regime would be a part of brahmacharya, okay,
Yeah.
and of course, celibacy until they get married would be also a very important part of brahmacharya. So, Chandranath was of the opinion that those who follow brahmacharya at the first phase of their life would become morally and socially much more successful in their later life. So
Yeah.
yes, I would think that Chandranath was quite serious about brahmacharya ashram and garhasthi ashram and all these other ashramas, and therefore the Varnashrama Dharma of traditional Hindu society.
Right. So, if he believed in the birth-based Varnas, did he also think of someone, let's say, in the lower Varnas as an inferior person? What would he, or should they continue with their inferior menial job professions? Would he believe those things?
We do not particularly see any comment that would lead us to believe that he was looking down upon the lower castes, the so-called lower castes, but we get to see an acknowledgement of the social and labor division based on the Varnashrama Dharma. Okay, and he is quite serious about maintaining that social labor division. Okay,
I see.
but
Okay.
what is very interesting, so far as I'm concerned, is that we do not really get to see a serious discussion about the basis of Varnashrama and specifically about the Varna. So, for example, Guna and Karma, the two main criteria on which Sri Krishna bases his version of Varnashrama Dharma, and which he, basically claims or asserts as the true view or the purest form of Varnashrama Dharma in the Bhagavad Gita. We do not get to see a kind of detailed discussion about that, or even a specific discussion about that in Chandranath, at least so far as I have read. I may be wrong, because Chandranath has written other articles also apart from Hindutva, Hindu Prakrita Itihash, and I have not covered all those writings. But so far as I have read Hindutva, Hindu Prakrita Itihash, and his controversies with Rabindranath, I do not get to see a kind of meticulously hair-splitting discussion about the basis of Varna, at least.
Okay. What were the pros of child marriage that Rabindranath gave? What did he give?
Yeah, so one of the pros that both Chandranath as well as Rabindranath agree upon in terms of child marriage was that it will maintain the status quo of the Hindu society, in the sense that this will not create a social upheaval right at that time. So both these men,
I mean, population demographics wise.
not just demographics wise, but also in terms of the kind of moral changes that will take place, the kind of social changes that will take place.
I see.
Because when child marriage is normalized, or rather was normalized, then there was a particular kind of life that the Hindu householder would lead. And when that is changing, and supposedly if it is changing by force of law, brought in by the help of the British, then that change will be sudden. And Rabindranath was quite against this sudden change, or the suddenness of a social change brought out by any individual or social group, or even lawmakers. So in that sense, this status quo that I'm talking about is something that both a person like Rabindranath Tagore and Chandranath Basu, they both valued that status quo. That they were of the opinion that any kind of sudden forcible change thrust upon the society ultimately brings harm to that society.
Very interesting. Did Rabindranath oppose in writing his views on idol worship as well?
No, not really, because Rabindranath himself had been talking, writing, and speaking about subjects where image worshipping, I won't call it idol worshipping, but image worshipping becomes, or rather aspects of image worshipping are quite natural. At least that would be the impression that a reader or an audience would get by listening to or reading Rabindranath's speeches or works. And in fact, in a conversation with his contemporary poet Nobin Chandra Sen, who was, by the way, a brother of Keshav Chandra Sen, who had written this famous long poem called Palashir Juddha.
Oh,
right?
I
So
see.
that Nobin Chandra Sen is who we are talking about. So there was this famous exchange, perhaps not so famous, but this exchange between Nobin Chandra and Rabindranath, where Rabindranath was sort of acknowledging, confessing even, that he has very clear tendencies of valuing, of looking with reverence the practice of image worship. And this is something that his fellow Brahmos had criticized him for. Okay.
I
In
see.
fact, right after, or even towards the end of Maharshi's life, Rabindranath was accused of being a Prachanno Murti Pujak, which would mean a pseudo Brahmo, that is somebody who
Okay.
is a image worshipper. Secretly, he's an image worshipper, and this is something that is also sort of proven. Many people like to prove this by showing how his favorite nephew Surendranath, the son of Satyendranath Tagore.
Hmm.
Um, Surendranath had great reverence for the Gopinath Vigraha, the
Okay.
idol of the image of Sri Krishna in their Shilaidaho estate in East
Okay.
Bengal. So
Okay.
Surendranath used to take great care of that Vigraha. I mean, in terms of providing the finances, etc.
Hmm.
And Rabindranath's son Rothindranath, at the time of his wedding, had gone on to do pranam of this same vigraha. So he had
Okay.
gone to pay respects to this particular deity. So all these instances are cherry picked in order to prove that Rabindranath was basically an image worshipper, and also many of his writings were aspects of image worshipping, especially with the kind of uh, common recurring theme that he has in his poetry and his songs of the feet of the Lord. Okay,
Hmm.
that is something that is very, very prominent in Tagore's thought and Tagore's poems and songs, that he
Yeah.
talks about the feet of the Lord. And sometimes while talking about the motherland or the mother goddess imagined as the motherland, he borrows imagery from prominent Hindu deities such as goddess Durga. If you read, his songs, his patriotic songs like Oi Bhuvana Mono Mohini Ma, then you get to see a very clear depiction of the Devi or goddess, the divine goddess, and also this very prominent Swadeshi era song called Aji Bangladesher Hridoy Hote Kokhon Aponi তুমি এই অপরূপ রূপে বাহির হলে জননী. In that particular song, he has very clear mention or reference to the goddess Durga, because he says ডান হাতে তোর খড়গ জলে বাঁ হাত করে শঙ্কা হরণ. This is
Hmm.
basically a very anatomical description of
Right.
the image of goddess Durga, how in
Right.
which particular hand she holds a particular weapon or a particular object. So all that has been used by Tagore in order to
Hmm.
create the image of the mother goddess, and in that image the motherland. So for
Hmm.
all these reasons, I do not think that Rabindranath was so particularly keen on debating the issue of image worshipping. He
Hmm.
himself always discouraged any kind of controversy in this regard.
Right. When Manmohan Singh became the prime minister, they did a cover story on him and said that so now Sonia Gandhi is Bhuvan Mohan Mohini for Manmohan Singh.
That's quite
That's
funny.
what I that's what I first heard that word.
As I
Now,
wasn't aware of it. Thanks for mentioning. This is quite funny.
uh, do you agree with this thing? This comment?
Let me see. Bankim's
Bankim's
view
view
on
on yeah.
Varnashrama is same as today's RSS stand or Swami Vivekananda. I know about Swami Vivekananda's position. What is the RSS stand? Can you maybe give me a?
That there's no point in following a birth-based system anymore. It might have some use in the past. Basically, today it's irrelevant.
It had no use at any time or any moment in our civilization's history. I don't think if this is the RSS stand, then I think RSS is the most representative Hindu organization. I mean, if this is the only criterion of determining who is a Hindu, our Hindu scriptures are very clear. I mean, if you regard the Bhagavad Gita as one of the most important Hindu scriptures, and if
Hmm.
you also regard the Mahabharata, of which Bhagavad Gita is a part, then
Right.
you get to see that throughout the Mahabharata and of course in the Gita, there is a denial of birth-based passing down
Right.
of the Varna. Varna cannot be attained or acquired from birth. This is something that the Lord Sri Krishna and the Mahabharata in general, or one may say Vyasadeva, Maharshi Veda Vyasa, Krishna Dvaipayana Veda Vyasa, he was quite clear about this, that guna, or the inherent qualities based on sattva, rajas, tamas, these threefold division of the qualities, and karma, the kind of karma or actions that you become attracted to, that you have a natural tendency towards. And natural tendency reminds me of another term called swabhava. This is something that repeatedly occurs in the Bhagavad Gita, swabhavaja. Okay, the kind of action that naturally occurs to you, that naturally draws you towards it. Okay,
Right.
that determines your karma, and that determines your varna too. Now, birth has only that role to play, in which, you know, the child emulates or imitates a father or
Yeah.
their parent in general.
Yeah.
So it is quite natural. It is a natural thing among all children that
Yeah.
they would have a tendency to imitate or
Yeah.
emulate the values and practices of their parents. Now,
Yeah.
some child may not do that, but most
Yeah.
children would do that. So birth
Yeah.
has only that role to play. So it
Right.
cannot. It is not a guarantor. It is not a basis, fundamental basis of varna. On this,
Okay.
our Hindu scriptures are very clear. You know, at least the Srimad
I
Bhagavad
see.
Gita and the Mahabharata, both of which are regarded as dharma shastras, not just moksha shastra or the
Right.
Purana, or Itihasa Purana, because many people say that Mahabharata is only an Itihasa and therefore it is inferior to the Shruti, and therefore
Okay.
whatever the Shruti has said, even the Shruti is also quite clear. If you go into the Upanishads, you get to see how flexible, the social mobility is. You know, how
Okay.
somebody who has who is not even aware who their parent is becomes a brahmana. Somebody who's a kshatriya becomes a brahmana. Somebody who's a brahmana becomes a kshatriya. And this sort of example is quite common in the Shruti literature, that is in the Vedas and the Upanishads. So
Right.
so far as the Hindu scriptures are concerned, this is the the purest view, that birth
Right.
has very little role to play on
Okay.
the determination of the varna. Guna and karma are the
Hmm.
uh, fundamental uh, aspects of it.
Okay. Now, I don't want to make this a complete discussion on casteism or caste, but one last thing, can you clarify it for me or and for our viewers? Is that the main counter that comes to whatever you said is the Purvajanam Sanskara. So, if you are
Hmm.
born into a Brahmin family, that means you did really great things in your past life. So, therefore,
Hmm.
you are great in this life as well, and therefore, you deserve extra respect. And someone who was born in a lower Varna, of course, did not do as much great things in their past life. Therefore,
Hmm.
now what are they going to do, and how do we look upon these people, both in the
Yeah.
higher
So
varnas and lower varnas?
right. So the Purvajanma Samskara is as legitimate as Guna and Karma. So, this very premise of taking birth in a particular family becomes problematized as soon as somebody points out that how do you understand that that particular family is a Brahmin family? Okay, or
Hmm.
a Kshatriya family? Is it
Right.
that each and every member of that family are following the vritti or the profession of the Brahmana or the Kshatriya? If that is the case, then this particular premise will work, that somebody who has taken birth in such a family will be regarded as a Brahmin, and their Purvajanma samskaras and their punya, or the great deeds that they have done in their past life, have naturally given them a particular kind of birth. Okay,
Hmm.
but or rather in general, this particular premise does not hold good, because to say that a particular family is a Brahmin family is itself problematized. Yeah,
I see.
because not every member of a family will follow the same profession, or the
Right.
profession of a Brahmin or a Kshatriya specifically. So you
Okay.
get to see a kind of example in our Shruti literature as well as the Smriti literature, where within the same family there are multiple professions, people who are following multiple professions. So that
Right.
particular premise is not very strong, I feel.
I see. So, would you go ahead and say that therefore today's scholars and intellectuals are the Brahmins of today, or Brahmin is specifically whatever is mentioned that
Of
his
course,
duties are?
no, scholars of a particular type, scholars who are in the business of making people more cultivated and trying to improve people's moral and social standing can be considered as Brahmins. Not all scholars can be considered as Brahmins. Somebody like a person who's trying to spread falsehood and anti-nationalism, they cannot be called Brahmin. Only those who are trying to improve somebody's moral standing, only those who are trying to improve people's knowledge base and their social standing by offering knowledge quite freely. That is also a very important aspect of Brahminism. Okay, if you are giving knowledge in exchange of something, some material object or money, then you are not a Brahmin. Then you are a Pashanda. Okay, Pashanda. I hope you understand that. The quite opposite of what Brahmin is, right? So if you are giving away knowledge, if you are trying to improve people's lives through the scholarship that you have gained or something that you are pursuing, free of cost, just like that, you're doing it because you think that is your dharma, that is your duty towards society, then only you are Brahmin. Otherwise, you are a Pashanda.
Right. Okay, we need a separate episode with you just to discuss Varna as well now. This will be huh?
You mean that you need a separate?
Yeah.
Am I
separate
audible?
Episode. Yeah. Separate episode just on Varna as well.
No, but I am not an authority on these things. I am simply, a moralizer, like I have been tagged on social media.
No. Your perspective on this is still interesting because everyone needs to comment on this.
Okay.
Therefore, the best consensus can come out. Actually, a rock solid
Yeah,
consensus
of course.
can come out.
Yes, of course. My opinion on this is based on my perusal of the Hindu scriptures. So I can speak from that perspective.
Right. Now, this is my last question for today then, Sreejit Datta. That do you agree with idol worship, the views of Chandranath on idol worship, and do you agree that Rabindranath was an idol worshipper as well, or image worshipper?
First of all, I have a problem with the term idol worshipping. I think it is image worshipping, and Chandranath provides fantastic, grounds why image worshipping is a natural thing for the human beings, not just Hindus, but human beings in general. He also gives example from other religions, from other sects and creeds and nations, how image worshipping is quite natural to their practices, quite inherent, intrinsic to their practices also, and that it is not a practice that is exceptionally observed by the Hindus, that it is not a Hindu exceptionalism. So I think everybody should read that particular chapter on Pratima or Murti Puja, in which and also in the introduction that he has written to this book, Hindutva, Hindu Prakriti Itihash. Sadly, there is no English translation of it, at least not that I am aware of. So those who can access Bangla, I think they should read these sections of his book in order to understand what sort of fantastic, and fantastic is a term I am using in a positive sense. I'm praising his rationality, his rational approach, on the basis of which he justifies, legitimizes, and explains. Not just, it is not a question of legitimizing, in fact, I would like to retract that term, and I would say that how he explains or interprets image worshipping is something that is fascinating, that everybody should read, and they should seriously confront these arguments if they want to confront it. If they want to take a sort of contrary opinion or contrary stance, then I think they should be aware at least of Chandranath's arguments, and then they should proceed to sort of oppose image worshipping or whatever. And to your second question, I have to say that Rabindranath, like I have already mentioned, that he had acknowledged suspicion about his own latent tendency towards image worshipping, and that many people also accused him of being secretly worshipping images, etc. And also because I would like to point out, this is something that we had briefly mentioned in one of the earlier episodes in this series, how Ram Mohan Roy's Brahmoism is basically a peculiar combination of Advaita Vedanta and Tantra. Now, this is something that is only particularly given to those who are initiated following the Diksha system of the Adi Brahmo Samaj. Now, if we go by that particular knowledge of how the Diksha happened, then Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Maharishi Devendranath, as well as Rabindranath Tagore, they are following that same Diksha and that same spiritual pursuit. So, in their personal spiritual pursuit, which is very individual, which is very secretive, okay?
Yeah.
There they have to go through that tantric tenets and concepts, or at least the kind of mental manifestations that a practice of that particular form of tantra, according to the Mahanirvan Tantra, requires. So it is something that one can speculate also, that based on his personal individual sadhana or spiritual pursuit, perhaps it was quite necessary for Rabindranath and even Maharishi Devendranath or Raja Ram Mohan Roy to undergo certain aspects of image worshipping. Which is why for all these three people, we do not get to see a kind of vehement rejection of image worshipping. They are, not Rabindranath, but Raja Ram Mohan and Maharishi Devendranath, they eulogize, they prioritize the concept of Nirakara Saguna worshipping, or qualified without form worshipping, but they are very particular in not criticizing or opposing Murti Puja or image worship.
I see. Okay, Sreejit Datta, thank you very much for this very eye-opening conversation. Hope to have you back soon, and we have many more people to discuss, and especially the most famous or infamous person as well, Raja Ram Mohan Roy. And
yes, sure. I also look forward to discussing these different personalities. Thank you. Namaste.
Yeah. Thank you. Good night.
Good.
महाभीमं गुणाद्रष्टाङ्गरप्रदम् अस्य युक्तं त्रिनेत्रं च कपालकर्णिकाकरा मुक्तकेशिं ललज्जयः पिबन्तीं रुधिरं चतुर्बाहु समायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत् चतुर्बाहु समायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत् काली महाकाली कालिके पापहारिणी धर्मर्थ मोक्षदे देवी नारायणी नमोस्तुते धर्मर्थ मोक्षदे देवी नारायणी नमोस्तुते काली